So I guess we could start by telling you about this book that we just had come out, which was just, I guess, released yesterday. Although I'm in Canada and it wasn't released. I won't get it. I won't actually see a print version for 10 days. But did you get your copies yet, Dave?
Yes, I have. I've gotten I got a couple actually a few days ago. So
okay.
yes, it exists. I don't have one within reach, but yeah, okay. Hold on, give me 1 second.
Okay. Oh yeah, if you want to show a copy to the camera at the beginning of the conversation, it would be good. Yeah.
Good. Yes, I've only seen the Kindle version, and so my box is going to my house in Arizona, but I'm not going to be back for 5 weeks. So I had one of my Canadian friends order, but on Amazon. All right, there we go. Turn it right side up, and then all right, there we go.
Right there, a real book. So
this is a book. So again, we're very excited because it just came out. So Dave and I, we co-authored a social psychology textbook before with Robert Cialdini and Steve Newberg, who are two social psychologists, and Dave has a background in film from NYU. And so one of the things that he was doing with our text is doing, a lot of the media. Now the textbooks are like electronic. And so we have little videos of famous psychologists from around the world, which we can do just like this, kind of get, interviews. And so Dave's done all the technical stuff. And then we started talking about writing a book. And originally we had, and you could actually describe this, Dave. How did we originally get started on this project?
Well, okay, so one of the key ideas at the center of this book is this pyramid of needs, or these 7 fundamental motives that my dad, Steve Newberg, Vlad Griskevich, and Mark Schaller put together and published a paper on. And I remember when I first saw this, so I had gone to film school, and I was like, this is a great explanation for what makes things compelling in movies. The 7 things are, getting basic needs, basic provisions, dealing with risks, and then affiliation, gaining status, finding a mate, keeping a mate, and taking care of your kin. And I was like, at the time, I think I was watching like Game of Thrones, and I was like, every episode of Game of Thrones is like somebody choosing between like surviving and protecting their kids, and so we started it from that angle of like, this is a great way to describe what people are interested in, and then as we were talking to people about the idea, they were like, this actually has a lot of application for not just movies but the decisions we make every day. And so that's where the book came from. So
great. So let's talk then about those 7 fundamental motives, which are even part of the subtitle of the book. What are these? I mean, I have the list here, but could you tell us about them?
Sure. So the basic idea is that all of our ancestors had to solve certain problems. Okay, so I'm an evolutionary psychologist, so I like to think about humans in the perspective of kind of, what we know from cultural anthropology and evolutionary biology. Where would you put Homo sapiens into this? And so I started off with just this purely intellectual interest, because I toyed with being a biology major and an anthropology major as a student. And then, so an evolutionary psych perspective was very appealing to me. And so we began to do research on questions like, how does activating these different motives, like fear of outgroup males, which was something our ancestors had to be concerned about, or finding mates, which obviously all of our ancestors were concerned with at least one, or we wouldn't be here to talk about it. So we would activate these motives and look at how it affected what we pay attention to, how I remember different people, and so forth. And then we started talking, my friend Mark Schaller, I'm now up at UBC in Vancouver, and we would walk around the streets of Vancouver thinking about rewriting Maslow's, the pyramid of needs, which everybody who takes intro psych sees, in terms of what do we now know 50 years later. And so we devised this this new pyramid. And in some sense, it follows some of Maslow's basic ideas that these motives unfold developmentally. When you're a baby, all you care about is being warm and getting fed and having your diaper changed, okay? And so you just, you don't have a lot of social skills or social needs. You just have to get your mom's attention. And so you're just about survival. And biologists talk about something called life history, which the idea of life history theory is that as an animal, any animal develops, it has to decide where to allocate its scarce resources. And the first place is what they call somatic effort, building your body, okay? And that's what the baby's doing, is just building its body. And then as animals get older, they become concerned with spending those resources on mating. And if you are a mammal, you have another level, which is parenting. And so we started to think about the Maslow pyramid in light of life history theory. And if you're a human, we do the same things that other mammals do, but we have some other kind of layers. Okay, so as you develop, when you're a child, so Dave has a younger brother who's just turned 18 years old. And so as we were watching him, and then Dave has two children of his own. He's got a 16 and a 14-year-old. You can see them developing, and when they're babies, they have no, all they're concerned about is that basic survival. And then at some point, and it's not, it's till they get to be about mobile, that kids become concerned about stranger anxiety. They get afraid. Once kids start to move around, they have to protect themselves from bad guys, in some sense, in the movie terminology. And then as they get a little older, they become concerned with making friends. I know when Dave's younger brother first went into the same preschool that my two grandchildren, his two kids, went to, he didn't care about, forming. He just wanted to play with toys. And when another kid came near, he pushed him away. That was his first social interaction when he was, 3 years old. But then he began to become concerned with making friends. But he didn't care whether they looked up to him or looked down on him, okay? He could have a wet diaper and continue to play along and not care what anybody thought about, how he appeared publicly. But then, in the later grades, kids become concerned about their status. In some sense, do people look down on me or look up on me? And then at puberty, people start to become concerned with finding mates. Mm-hmm. And then after you find mates, humans, unlike 95% of other mammals, we maintain these mating relationships because human babies are especially helpless, so they need the father's input. And then finally, at the top of our pyramid, and this is not when people think about, say, self-actualization, they think that's an ideal. Okay, we don't think of the top of our pyramid as some ideal that everybody should aspire to. It's the way humans were designed, is to take care of their families as the last step, and now begin to help these younger organisms work their way through that same pyramid, the next generation. And so again, every human had to solve these problems: survive, protect yourself from the bad guys, make some friends, get some respect, find a mate, keep a mate, and care for your offspring. And that was true amongst hunter-gatherers. As we were preparing this book, we did a lot of reading of anthropology, so I got back into my early, youthful interest in anthro and started reading these case studies of different societies. And you do see these issues come up in different ways in every single society. There's no society, for example, in which human beings don't bond with one another. In most other mammals, there's no connection between the male and the female, but in every human society, there's a bonding between the parents. It doesn't always look exactly, it's not always a monogamous relationship, but it is there. There are relationships between parents in every society, and in every society, human parents care a lot about their children. And so the question that we ask then is, so we look at our kids and ask, they're in this modern world and they've got a set of powerful motivations that were designed to help our ancestors solve these problems. but those motivational systems were shaped at an earlier period of evolution. And you asked the question, a good question in your list of questions, which is, well, haven't we evolved at all in the last, since the agricultural revolution in the last 10,000
that was
years?
what I was going to ask you, because is it the case that these 7 fundamental motives just happen to be some of the ones that got preserved from, from the Stone Age? Or, is that the case, or is it that there are other aspects of our human psychology that may be changed through time since the past 13,000 years or so and are not part of this list, let's say?
I certainly think one of the things that we have learned, right, as scientists and as people over the past several decades, is that there's a lot of really complicated stuff going on in our brain. It's been this sort of movement from this idea, what I think my dad describes as the blank slate, right? That we're just sort of born with just anything. And then there's sort of also, I think, as evolutionary psychology caught on, it's like, okay, we survive and we reproduce. We're designed for those two things. And Dad, you guys came up with the pyramid, but I think that this is a step. I don't know that these 7 things would totally capture every single thing that people will desire, but it's a pretty good breakdown of the major goals that we have, if that makes sense.
And so I would say, I agree with that I would actually argue it's pretty comprehensive, because there's lots of things we want that our ancestors didn't want, okay? They didn't want money because they didn't have money, okay? And humans spend a lot of time now worrying about money, okay? But money is connected to these basic goals, okay? We want money because it helps us buy food. It helps us, buy houses to protect ourselves, okay? It helps us, attract mates if we're males in particular. Yeah. And it helps us buy food for our children. And so money is something our ancestors didn't have, but I don't think we've developed a new portion of our brain that's the money module, okay? We use a lot of the tools of modern culture are used in the service of these ancestral motivations. And, we didn't have automobiles, we didn't have trains, we didn't have light rail, okay, we didn't have airplanes. And so, in some sense, in the last 200 years, things have radically changed, okay? Because even during the feudal period in Europe, most people lived in little villages and they farmed. Most people were still close to the earth. They were living a different life than our hunter-gatherer ancestors, but it was still not that different. They lived around their families. They gathered crops instead of going out and hunting, although they continued to hunt a bit. But then all of a sudden, after the Industrial Revolution, in a period that's too quick for our brains to have adapted at all of these crazy changes happened. Antibiotics, in addition to all of those technological things I talked about before, all of a sudden, we're very concerned about COVID. And if you look at the number of people that COVID killed compared to the numbers of people who used to die from childhood infections in our ancestors' time, it was really nothing. It was just a kind of a drop in the bucket. Now, they also didn't have things like COVID. Their diseases were mostly local diseases they got from, the local animals or the local dirt or whatever, because they weren't globally connected. So yes, we live in a different world. And in some sense, that's what the book is about. It's like, so how do we've got mechanisms designed to live in small villages with relatives and friends who we keep for life because they're our second cousin or our brother, okay? And now we still stay friends. I mean, Dave and I are friends, my younger son is friends with, go ahead, Dave, you were about to.
I just to tie it back a little to the question of whether or not our brains have evolved, our brains still it's not like evolution has stopped, right? I think there's changes in, like, people have become less aggressive, and there's, questions of, well, have we sort of bred ourselves to not be aggressive? But I think that, and even now, there are, things that there are features that will make one person probably succeed evolutionarily. I don't know that that's the best word for it, but you know what I mean, like, versus other people. So
yeah,
we
there
are
might be genetic traits. Yeah, there might be genetic traits that make us function better in modern societies. Some of our ancestral traits are being called out.
Also, one other thing to even think about, we talk about this sort of like Stone Age brain and how our brains were designed. Probably wasn't the case for everybody back in the Stone Age, right? It wasn't back then. There were plenty of people that weren't adapted to that environment, but they probably didn't do as well. So it's just, it does change, and it will continue to change, but society just changes very quickly, and it has changed
much
more
Yeah,
quickly.
just to clarify my question, one of the reasons I asked you that is that, for example, you have the work recently done by people like Joe Henrick, where he tries to explain from a cultural evolutionary perspective how the weird psychology evolved, for example. And I'm mentioning that not because I think that specifically would have some sort of influence over these 7 fundamental motives, would change them or turn them into something different, but just to say that perhaps there are other aspects of our human psychology that would have evolved over these 13,000 or so years, but do not manifest on the level of these motives or needs that we have to fulfill as human animals. So,
I think, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, in terms of Henrick's argument, I don't think that we've evolved, during the, he talks a lot about the, the Catholic and the Protestant churches and their, their cultural influence. But I don't think Henrick would argue that there's been enough time for those things. We didn't evolve. Some of us evolved mechanisms to want to cross ourselves, and do the things that the Catholics and others quickly evolved a number of things that said don't have crucifixes in your church and and fancy decorations like the Lutherans. And so I think that Henrick is talking about culture. How culture does have emergent properties that have to fit with human nature, that a lot of the things that you see happening, even within the church, there's hierarchies, and there's a lot of human things play out. And even though they had rules about celibacy for Catholic priests, those weren't always followed, okay? Sometimes, the culture is pushing in one direction, and it's partially, there was a fabulous paper by Donald Campbell about 40 years ago that sort of helped start evolutionary psych. And what he argued is that there's a sort of a competition sometimes between, we live in society and it provides us a number of benefits, but we carry with us all of these sort of selfish, self-serving tendencies. And so a lot of societal rules have to be put in place to say, don't do this thing that comes naturally to you, okay? Don't kill, okay? Don't steal, okay? And that usually doesn't mean don't kill your brothers and sisters, because people don't kill their relatives. But now when we come in contact with members of other tribes, this happens all the time. I mean, you're living in Portugal, Dave grew up in Pennsylvania, and I'm now in Vancouver, and we're talking to one another, okay? And so that, in the modern world, a lot of those ancestral mechanisms need to be checked, okay? That we can't just go act the way we acted in the past. And so that's part of the issue, is how does modern, the emergent properties of modern culture, how do they interact with our ancestral mechanisms? And we're concerned with a much more day-to-day problem, which is that, okay, you as an individual, You know, not so much the question of how did society evolve. We're concerned with the question of, okay, here I am. I'm now living in this world in which I can get on a plane and fly to Portugal tomorrow if I want to. Okay, I can, you know, I can do all kinds of things that I couldn't do before. But does that mean my life is better? You know, and not always. Because sometimes these novel technologies, in the same sense of, well, we now have drugs that make us feel really, really good. We can take heroin, okay? Feels really good. It taps into, it takes advantage of some existing mechanisms in our bodies that that basically are receptors that turn off the pain receptors, okay? And so now we can take a drug that will do that. But is that good for us? Well, no, you know. It might be okay to do once, but you start doing it on a daily basis and you've wrecked your life. And I think there's a lot about modern society that offers these temptations because in some sense, I like to use the metaphor of Ben and Jerry's ice cream. I don't know if you have Ben and Jerry's in Portugal.
Yeah, we have.
Yes. It's like our ancestors would have killed for Ben and Jerry's ice cream. All of those calories, all that delicious fat, you know, and they're on the verge of starvation. But in the modern world, you know, like none of our ancestors died of heart disease. But in the modern world, it's the most common way to die. Even during the COVID period, heart disease took out more people than COVID did. And our ancestors never got heart disease because they never got access to things like Ben and Jerry's.
So before we get into perhaps some novel aspects of the problems we have to deal with in post-industrial societies and perhaps even into concepts like evolutionary mismatches, let me just ask you one specific question about these 7 fundamental motives. So, and since it's sort of an update on Maslow's hierarchy of needs, does it work also as a hierarchy or not? I mean, are there some motives or problems that we have to solve that are more basic than others and we have to sort of move up the ladder, or how does it work?
I think, so I mean, and correct me if you disagree, Dad, but so this is a thing that we've talked about, and we're actually, even in the original paper, it talks about, look, you don't drop a motive, right? And I think, I've actually thought before that we should talk about it as a prism of fundamental motives, that it's like you can just sort of view the world as you need these things. I think it's organized in terms of sort of the ways people tend to hit them from sort of birth through parenting, right? But I also think that sometimes, like, we were talking about different titles, and one title we talked about was like climbing the pyramid of needs, and then we decided against that because I think that would lead people to think, no matter what I'm doing right now, I need to go have kids, right? I need to go have kids, and that is totally not the idea, right? Like, the idea is, I mean, I don't even think the idea is specifically you should be going for one over the other, as much as these are the 7 things people tend to need. Would you agree with that?
Well, yeah, I guess what you were trying to say, I definitely agree with. Once they unfold, so a baby isn't concerned with finding mates, okay?
Sure.
But once we get to be adults, okay, we've got all of those motivational systems that have now been unlocked, in a sense, and they turn on and off depending upon the current situation we're in and who we are. Okay, so there are individual differences. We actually have a scale to measure individual differences in fundamental motives. And 2 people of the same age may have a different hierarchy depending upon, do they have children or not? Okay, once you have children, your priorities change. Okay, if you don't have children, you can be, 50 years old and still seeking a mate. Okay, and if you don't have a mate, you're not going to be concerned with maintaining a mateship. So in some sense, it depends upon who you are and what your current opportunities and threats are, whether or not any of those systems get turned on. But is anyone more important? Well, survival is always important. You can't live without some somatic effort without taking in some calories and protecting yourself against poisonous snakes, okay? Protecting yourself from the bad guys. In the modern world, we are much safer, which we don't think of it because the news feeds us all these ideas. There's this threat, there's this war going on, there's another war going on over here, there's another war about to start over here. And it's like, you know, things are dangerous. There's people murdering one another. But in reality, you know, I don't know if you ever read, you know, Pinker's book. Pinker, you know, I actually do, you bring up this controversy. Some people think our ancestors weren't that violent. I've talked to my anthropological friends. That's a lovely position, this Rousseauian view that our ancestors were actually nice. And people keep bringing it back. There was a very nice book written by a Dutch guy, a political scientist, saying that, yeah, really it's exaggerated how violent our ancestors were. I talked to, you know, both to Pinker and to Kim Hill, who's done some of the research that people argued about there. Our ancestors were a lot, in general, much nastier than life in the most violent cities today. Okay, they didn't have atomic weapons. Okay, they didn't have machine guns. But
that doesn't necessarily mean that you can always prioritize survival or self-protection over the other needs either, right? It's not like the ones at the bottom take priority any more than the ones at the top do, right? Which, going back to almost that idea of talking about like Game of Thrones, it's always compelling when somebody has to like go out and protect the people they love, right? And so, and even in less life or death situations, I think there are times where, you know, in order to maybe ask someone out or whatever, you've got to take some social risks, or you may even, you know, there's like the Von Hippel skateboard study. Sometimes it pays to try a trick that's a little dangerous. So I think there's always trade-offs. There's always these balances. So
what's the Von Hippel skateboard study?
The idea that isn't that where they went to the skate park and they would either they had guys
if I remember correctly, they would bring some attractive females that would work as actors, and so when guys who were skating were exposed to the attractive females, they would have more risky behavior and perform more risky, I don't know, moves or whatever, and the ones who were able to pull them off had more mating success, I guess.
I don't know if they actually
necessarily measure mating success.
Yeah. But then with other things we know from evolutionary psychology, usually
Right. Yeah. So the guy, when they would either bring a male or female like camera person, right, and they'd say, "Hey, we want to film you doing like a trick you're working on," and when it was the woman, these were mostly guys at the skate park, the guys would be less likely to bail. They'd be more likely to either they'd commit and they'd either slam into the ground or they'd land the trick. So
and the testosterone levels went up during that. The higher the testosterone levels. So in some sense, testosterone is one of the things it's one of the parts of one of our systems. You know, the mating.
Right, which also goes back to this sort of idea that it's like how complex our brains are, right? So it's like we actually will, as guys, will get a spike of testosterone, which will change a bunch of things about our decision-making processes. Our ability, I think, to do like math gets changed and all these sorts of things. So, yeah, so we have a lot going on in our brains.
So one other punchline of where you were going with that, Dave, I just want to underline where you were going, because I understand where you're going now. What the point of the Von Hippel skateboard study is that sometimes people will risk survival in order to attract mates. And that definitely suggests that things at the bottom can be turned off if something at the top is now currently highly active.
And as I was mentioning, of course, that was not part of that study, but as we know from other things done in evolutionary psychology, usually risky behavior, translates into more mating success if it's done correctly, if the person does not die, for example. Right?
Yes. Well, so risky behavior is risky. Because sometimes it results, there's all this research that Martin Daly and Margot Wilson did on the young male syndrome.
Yeah.
Sometimes you die, okay? But what they pointed out is that if you don't find a mate and you're a young male, well, that's evolutionary death. And so
Yeah.
basically, you know, the guys who succeed, they succeed even better if they're willing to compete. But it is a risk. You might
It's
you might
basically
not win.
it's basically high risk, high payoff, right?
Yes.
In theory,
right.
but then there are
Hopefully.
also times, even thinking about the the Martin Daly young male thing, that brings up another example of where what might have worked in the ancestral environment, the math might not work out anymore, right? The chances of getting arrested and going to jail
Oh yeah.
are so much higher now. So often these mechanisms. But if you're a guy, I know when I throughout my life, I've had plenty of times where I'll be like in front of a girl and I'll feel sort of embarrassed and I'll have a desire to want to hit the guy, right? Like, and so, but it is less likely to, it's probably a lot of times it's going to be less likely to pay off in the modern world. So,
So let me ask you just another question about those motives, needs. For a human being to lead a fulfilling life, does he or she really have to hit all of these needs? I mean, does he or she have to fulfill all of them?
the short answer is no. So,
Yeah,
I think
I agree.
I'd say, well, I mean, so we use like the example of Osceola McCarthy, who didn't have kids. She did take care of other family, which is, I think, a key thing to keep in mind about kin care. And so, but she had a very fulfilling life. And I think that...
What do we say
Again,
who
this goes-
Osceola?
good
Let's actually
idea.
describe who she was. You
Yeah,
want me
go
to do
ahead, you go
that?
for
Just
it.
because.
Yeah.
But so we argue that, if you look, some people look at evolutionary psych, and Dave, you've made this argument that people have this stereotype of, well, what this means is we should go out and be like Genghis Khan. Okay, we should replicate our genes and conquer everyone that gets in our way. Okay, and what we argue is that there's this thing called the naturalistic fallacy. What's natural? That's natural. It's natural to want to compete and to replicate your genes. Okay, but is that good? Not necessarily. Lots of natural things are bad. In the modern world, with overpopulation, and we have brains that can see the consequences of overpopulation, pollution, international conflict, we don't necessarily want to just say, yeah, just go with what feels naturally.
So Osceola.
Okay, Osceola. So what I was saying is, so Osceola McCarthy was a woman. She was a poor African-American woman being raised in Mississippi. And in the 5th grade, she had to quit school to help her mother and her aunt. And what they did is they did laundry for people. And so she spent her life cleaning people's shirts and pressing them for like 10 cents a shirt, But she worked for years and years and years, decades and decades and decades. And she had very few expenses because they lived in a little family house. And she never got married, never had kids. And when she was 75, she had accumulated a tremendous amount of money for a poor person living in Mississippi. She had something like the equivalent of $700,000 in today's, and a woman who was a washerwoman. And she went into the bank, and her banker said, Osceola, you've got all this money. How would you like to invest it? And she said, I don't need that money. I want to give it away. And here's a woman who dropped out of school in the 5th grade. She set up a scholarships fund for African-American teenage girls to go to college. Okay, now she was a hero, and she lived a fulfilling life. She had connections with her community. People loved her, people cared about her, and so we actually think that ironically, the biggest piece of advice that I actually consulted a bunch of, you're going to say something, Dave, but let me finish.
I'm going to contradict this. I'm going to let you make this point, and then I'm going to contradict it.
Okay, I'll make the point, and then you can argue with me. Okay. We do this a little bit. As we were working on the book, it was kind of, some of the fun of it is that.
But tell them the.
Okay, so the Osceola McCarthy story is
so,
just.
So you ask
nice
people
to
what's
other people.
Yeah.
Be nice.
So this
And
is
I had asked. So I asked a bunch of my colleagues, people who I highly respect. People like Bert Holdobler, who, won a Pulitzer Prize for his work on the book on ants, and lots of other people I know who are famous and successful biologists, anthropologists, psychologists, and just people that I know who are just nice people who've lived good lives. Like my friend Vanjie Keefe, who's a friend of. Who's the mother of one of Dave's best friends, and she's just a wonderful person. But I asked all these people for some advice for Dave's younger brother when he was 10 years old, and none of them said, tell him to go out and get everything he can, to basically get as many women as he can, have as much fun as he can. What they said instead is, the most important thing is to be nice to other people. You be nice to other people, you'll live a happier and more fulfilling life. And that, I think, is really interesting.
I
We're
do
designed. Go ahead.
Yeah, please go ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and I don't want to say like, oh, I think people shouldn't be nice, but I also don't necessarily think, from my point of view, that it's like that the moral of this book or whatever should be like Osceola McCarthy. Like that, I worry that gets back into us sort of prioritizing certain needs over other needs, like and saying, oh, you should always then, instead of prioritizing the top of the pyramid or the bottom, you should prioritize affiliation, right? And I actually think the real thing that I would like people to take away from this is just think about which of these needs are you trying to fulfill, which of these needs are other people around you trying to fulfill, and what are ways you can go about doing that. And sometimes it makes sense to be like Osceola McCarthy and help people. A lot of times it does, right? There are other times where it might actually pay to be a little more like, I don't necessarily want to say Genghis Khan, but a little more like prioritizing taking risks or things like that. So that was the one thing I just wanted to make sure.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah, and I mean, it certainly also depends on personality and other individual differences, right? So, for example, if we're talking about attracting mates, certainly someone who scores high on sociosexuality would feel more fulfilled if they were able to have as many mates, sexual mates, as they could, right?
Yeah, so this...
I'm going to be back in one sec. But...
Okay, so I'm going to sort of going off of this idea, right? Because one of the ways that we talk about the world changing fast, right? We've talked about that. And I think it's really easy to visualize how your phone has changed. But, if you think about sort of like Richard Dawkins' idea of sort of these memes, that these ideas that change, I think it might be that for some people, right, pursuing sort of short-term relationships is the way to go. I also currently feel like there is a sort of cultural meme that everybody should be going for, especially guys, right? Okay, guys need to, if you're a man, you should be pursuing every mating opportunity. And that's another one where I think self-assessment and this sort of idea of what people want is really important. So.
Yeah. So what you're suggesting there is that some of these things might not be really coming from individual differences, but from cultural factors.
Well, I think that the two affect each other a lot, right? And cultural factors can have huge impacts on even biological, drives. And so. Yeah, so now I think that I think if you look at things like religion, that's a big cultural push towards affiliation, right? Be nice to people, maybe downplay going after mating opportunities, right? And then I think now there is also this sort of like, I mean, it's the free love and the Ev Psych idea of sort of, maybe go for those. And I don't want to say one is right or one is wrong, just that I think people can get caught up in these sorts of ideas of, oh, this is what everyone is doing. so I should do it. And so,
So perhaps that makes a good segue for another question I wanted to ask about the modern post-industrial world. I mean, when it comes to dealing with these 7 fundamental problems we have to solve from an evolutionary perspective, in what ways do we have it worse or harder?
So I would say that one of the ways we have it harder is that when it comes to, say, affiliation, you had our ancestors, I think, Dave, you made this point the other day in another talk we're having, that our ancestors probably didn't get lonely much of the time because they were always living in a village with their cousins and their brothers and their sisters and so forth. And loneliness is a modern phenomenon because we can get on a plane and fly to a new city to seek one opportunity. And then we suddenly find, we're no longer around our social support group. And so I think that's one of the things. I think another thing is there's this, we talk about like technological parasites, that because we have these powerful motives, there's an economic incentive for the creation of things that will satisfy those needs, but the in the same way that like heroin satisfies our desire to sort of feel good, it's not necessarily in our interest to always let these technologies control us. So for example, like these devices, they have advantages to them, okay? They allow us to communicate, like I can go, even if I'm far away from home, I can go on Facebook or some other social media and connect with my friends. But is that the same as having real friends? Well, there's research evidence that suggests that the more time kids spend on social media, the more depressed and anxious they are. And the more time they spend with real people in real conversations. I'm not sure where things like Zoom and Skype fit in, because I actually think that face-to-face conversations do feel pretty much like this, okay? But I do think that social media, there is evidence that suggests that it's designed to satisfy our affiliative motives, but it doesn't do it as well as the old natural way of talking to real people.
So, could I just ask you a question about that? So, but are we sure about the causality there? I mean, couldn't it be that people who are already depressed or prone to depression, that those are the ones that tend to use social media the most or spend the most time there?
So I actually going to jump in here because I think one of the I know my dad used the word designed, right? And economic incentive. And that makes it always, I think it's easy to think, partly because of how we perceive threats, right? How we're evolved to perceive threats, that when there is an app or something that is messing up our social life, somebody is behind that and they are intentionally making it mess up our social life in order to profit, right? And I think one of the really interesting modern problems is that, so these apps, they get sort of not naturally selected, but they get selected by sort of selection pressures on technology. And one of them is, a big one now, is what commands our attention gets our attention, right? And so that, I think, leads to this feedback loop where it gives you an immediate like upvote or whatever, right? Which when you're home and when you're depressed, it's sort of low risk, it can be high reward. And so those sorts of things, I think you're right. I think that if you're depressed, if you're feeling socially anxious, you're going to lean towards things that don't necessarily require like leaving the house and going out, suddenly going from depressed to like starring in a Broadway play. That's going to be a big shift, right? But going on your phone and just sort of trying to get some upvotes, that's much easier. So I think I don't know what the actual tech research is on the causal link, but my suspicion is it's a two-way thing.
Yeah, no, I mean, all of these. all of these things are bidirectional. But let me actually add one other thing to that, which is that the point that I think that I like about what you're saying is that when we talk about these technological parasites, we really don't mean to imply that they're not naturally emergent, because they're just giving us what we want. They're not doing anything evil. They're, if we want it, that makes that technology succeed even better. So, the more it satisfies our needs, the more successful it is. But I would actually argue that, well, let me give you one other example of a way technology. Kids spend a lot of time on computer games, and they're designed to really be very satisfying and very engaging and really get your attention. And there is evidence that suggests that college students, so these are people who've gotten into college, and even when you correct for their, I believe, even when you correct for their college entry scores, the more hours they spend, playing computer games, the worse their grades are. Okay, and again, there might be possibly mediating factors in there, that the ones who are going to get bad grades play more games. But I'll bet you lunch that that there's some causal relationship there, because you can't do two things at once. And if I've got a tremendously engaging game, I can see it in my own life. If I am reading the news headlines all morning, and they're giving me what I want to know. I want to know, what are the threats out there. In fact, there's a beautiful study that looked at the news headlines for 20 years. And what are the things that people look at? What are the successful headlines? Which are the ones that were most popular? 6 out of 7 of them are about threats. They're about warfare. They're about people killing one another. And so I want to know that. I'm personally responsible for clicking on that and reading that story. But if I do that all day, I know I didn't write the paper I have to write with my graduate student, or we didn't write the next chapter on our book. I would say there is some causal. There's undoubtedly bidirectional, as both of you are pointing out, that different people choose different pathways. But there's no way in the world that we have a finite amount of time, and if we're spending it doing one thing, we can't spend it doing the other thing.
So another topic, and starting now perhaps with surviving or survival, since we were talking earlier about how we have lower rates of violence in post-industrial societies compared to traditional societies, for example, what are some of the biggest threats we have to our survival in post-industrial societies?
I think things that drain our life, like we're talking about, these sort of apps and things, are one of the biggest modern, you have a limited amount of time on Earth, right? And that time can be taken from you by somebody showing up with a rock and hitting you in the head, or that time can be taken from you by just, sitting in front of a screen all day, which is a thing I do all the time, but as I mentioned, that's Game of Thrones. I loved it. And so, but I think that's one of the biggest threats. And just in general, there's these sort of out of control memes that can sort of take over and can lead to sort of these like intergroup, we have very factioned groups these days, and so I really
so let me go on that one, Dave.
Go ahead.
I think so. In the chapter on self-protection, we are mostly talking about purposeful exploitation. Like the real bad guys who wanted to, and sometimes they were our ancestors, the people who wanted to take something for themselves. Okay, and there are people. There are clearly, there are actually, I read an article in the New York Times, there are actually agents in Russia whose job it is to cause trouble in the United States, okay, who actually did set up some of these conflicts between the right-wingers and the left-wingers, and so a lot of that stuff is being done maliciously, it's malicious. Manipulation of the news is something that we really do have to watch out for. Now, another malicious thing that's out there, and it's more like a mosquito than like the the Russian spy thing, but there's little fees that get tacked on, secret little fees that keep getting tacked onto things, and that can catch you if you're not paying attention. So I'm in Canada, and when I came here once before, I had an AT&T device, and I didn't realize that I crossed from Washington into Vancouver, which is a half-hour drive, and all of a sudden, AT&T charged me $300 one night because my device was left on and it was downloading iTunes or something like that. And there's a lot of that going on, a lot of little secret ways in which we're being given fees, we're, a fee for this, a fee for that. And again, the people who do it, they're not malicious, they're seeking profit, okay? But the effect on me is just the same as if somebody had held a gun to me and said, give me the money in your wallet, okay? I've got less money. And so a lot of that micro-parasitism, I think, is very big in the modern world.
Yeah, I would actually say if there was one name I would say for the biggest threat, it's these sort of evil memes. And that's not just like memes like you're going to see like a picture of a cat, right? But just these sort of like even Russia versus the Ukraine, that's a war between people who probably would have never interacted, right? They're far away. And it's certainly Russia, anything that's going on between the United States and Russia, it's like there's these sort of ideas that end up sort of getting out of control to the point where people will go to war 1,000 miles away. So I think that's our biggest modern threat.
Mm-hmm. Since we were talking about, did you want to?
No, I was just going to agree that in the United States, and I'm a liberal, okay, and so I get from the Democratic Party, I get continual. They're attempting to get money from me. So what do? They scare me 10 times a day about what the Supreme Court's going to do next, what the Republicans are going to do next. And can I send money? Because otherwise the Republicans are going to take away our right to vote. And I do think that there's some legitimate grain of truth in all of these things. And yet I'm reminded 20 times a day, so I'm frightened. And I'm sure people in the Republican Party are being told all the time, the Democrats, they're going to basically overtax you. They're going to let people flood in from all of these countries to the South. And they're getting reminded 20 times a day. And, they stole the election. Send us your money, okay? And so there's a profit in spreading the bad. Some of these memes make money for people. And that is, I'm just agreeing at long length with what Dave said. That's very dangerous, especially when there's a profit added to it, that there's an incentive to feed you bad news so that you'll release some of your money. It exaggerates the importance of the bad news, and it creates, in the United States, it's created people who hate each other. I mean, I just drove along the coast, and I met Dave in Oregon, and I'd go through these beautiful parts of Northern California and Oregon and Washington, and I'd see these big Trump signs. Trump lost an election 2 years ago by 7 million votes, right? And yet there are these people who say Trump won. Okay, and why are they doing that? Well, because there's a machine, there's a meme machine that's feeding them and saying, send us more money and we'll send you a big poster you can put on your lawn that says Trump. So, yeah, a long way of just agreeing with what Dave was saying.
Yeah. Since we're talking about survival, would you include on that list health issues like obesity, for example?
So that's So we put that in the sort of basic needs thing in the book, in terms of, because that is it taps into that motive. I think that I think in terms of basic needs, we have a couple of things. One is at the individual level. This idea of, actually, it's the same thing at the individual level and the global level, which is overconsumption, right? Like, and like it's it's easy to get Ben and Jerry's. You know, Ben and Jerry are two people that I think were very good-hearted and just loved ice cream, and so they made ice cream, and people eat ice cream, and like, and then also you see with things like in America the water crisis, right? We've made these technological advancements, and we now know theoretically, okay, we're running out of water. But then in terms of my own, when I look around, I still water my plants, right? And I will probably continue to water my plants until the faucet turns off. And so I think those are the two big challenges.
And when it comes to consumer choice, do you think that nowadays, taking into account the kinds of products people are exposed to, it's really a matter of personal responsibility or personal choice, or is it more of a systemic issue?
Well, we have more control over the things that we can take personal responsibility over, right? So I actually think that people can have pretty big impacts on both, but you know, so as an individual out in the world, you can do things like trying to reduce the amount of ice cream you have in the house or whatever to protect your own environment. And then also you can, you know, all of these companies are run by people. And so I do think avoiding things like groupthink and sort of being willing to sort of speak up and say, hey, here's an idea for a way we could make things more water efficient or whatever, or make a different type of ice cream. I think people can have a lot of impact on both ends of that.
So in our book, though, we're talking mostly about the individual. And in that chapter, we discuss what are some ways that you can personally deal with this so you can avoid what we call the Elvis Presley problem, you know, where somebody who has a very attractive, healthy, young person ends up getting very obese and dying very young of, you know, heart-related problems. What can you personally do about that? And there is some research in psychology on what's called stimulus control. Okay, very powerful principle is that we are very much the products of our environments, are very powerful influences on our behavior, and it's extremely difficult to resist temptation. Okay, if you put Ben and Jerry's in front of me and a six-pack of my favorite beer, I'm lost. Okay, but I personally have control when I go to the supermarket. I can choose to arrange my home so I don't have a refrigerator full of beer and Ben and Jerry's, and I instead, you know, when I go to the supermarket, I purposefully buy kale and Swiss chard and other vegetables and tofu and, you know, and nuts, things that I kind of have heard are healthy, and I believe that. And so I stock my house with healthy foods, and I put them I create an environment that's more like our ancestral environment, in a sense, that has nearby berries and nuts rather than having nearby Ben and Jerry's. Because if I have to get up at 9 o'clock at night, I'm feeling a little hungry, I'm not going to go to the store and buy the Ben and Jerry's. I'm more quickly going to go into the kitchen and get a few nuts and berries. So we can control our environments. We can control the immediate stimulation, and that's a much better way. It's not good to buy things you find irresistible and put them in your house. It's better to control your local environment, because we're good at that. We're not good at resisting temptation.
I was just going to say, I just want to add one thing real quick. In terms of, my dad had just mentioned local responsibility, and I kind of like, Ricardo, you had mentioned personal responsibility, and I was thinking, well, on the personal level, you have a lot more control. There's also, you could think of local responsibility. One of the other things we talk about is sort of when you know, hey, this is what I want to do. I want to reduce refined sugar. Reaching out to, you know, getting a group of people to encourage you, working with your family to chop up vegetables, right? You can have a lot of impact at a sort of in between personal responsibility and global responsibility in terms of helping the people you interact with the most make beneficial decisions.
Yeah, on that line, Dave, there's the idea of stimulus control comes out of behavioral psychology, not out of evolutionary psychology. But there's a lot of great ideas in behavioral psychology. And another one, a guy named Platt, who wrote a paper on social traps, he talks about what Dave was just suggesting, that if you want to change a habit, an unhealthy, say I want to increase my exercise, okay, I can control my environment by what I did and what Dave did is we don't get parking stickers. We bike to work, okay? And we live close enough that we can bike, but we don't even have the parking sticker, okay? So that we're not tempted to get in our car and drive. And one of the other things, though, besides controlling your environment and making it so it's easier to exercise, you can make a public commitment. You can say, so, like I have said to people recently, I'm just going to drink one beer or one glass of wine a day. And I told Dave, and I told my wife, because those are the people who can watch me and they can sort of help me keep on it. And I might, if I want to do increased number of hours of exercise, I can tell Dave, I want to get up and walk. And Dave will walk with me because we live 3 blocks from one another. Dave and I will get up because during the COVID period, I did a terrible job of controlling my environment. I brought there was this worry about food shortages. So I bought all the chocolate I could find, and I had a house full of chocolate, and so I started to put on a little pot belly, and so now I might say to Dave, all right, every morning we're going to get up. In fact, Dave is very good about, every night, Dave and his younger brother and his son and his daughter and I and my wife, some combination of those people, we walk our dogs in the neighborhood. And Dave is always good about saying, hey, let's walk the dogs. And so and it turns out that by walking with Dave and his family, I end up getting, 2.5 miles of walking in almost every night. And
yeah,
so,
I would actually say, and I would say half the time it's my dad or Carol, my stepmom, who actually sends the text that says, hey, is it time to go for a walk? So it is a good back and forth. So
yeah, you can use other people to help you structure your environment. So yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great. And I mean, talking about other people, earlier we mentioned how making and keeping friends is harder in modern post-industrial societies than it is in traditional societies. So what would be the advice you would give to people? Because nowadays many people move around a lot, they change jobs, they move from one place to the other, when it comes to making new friends and keeping them.
So there's a lot of ways you can leverage technology for your benefit, right? So there's things like Meetup, right? There's also other forms of sort of analog technology, like, there's a lot of groups that you can generally find if you have a hobby, like I rock climb. And so there used to be actually it was a Meetup, but there are lots of ways you can find groups. And so finding groups, I think, is really good. The other thing is finding groups that work together to accomplish tasks, right? That's our ancestors would often, a lot of our affiliation came from not that, our ancestors would get together to play board games, but that they would work together to hunt or to build a shelter or to find food or to share information, right? And so thinking about modern ways to do that, for me, volunteering, I've met so many people. And I think that, and also even with my friends, sort of just, I actually have a board game friend group. And when we have days where we're help someone move, or we one time helped a friend of mine fix his car, and none of us were car people, but we all have YouTube. So we figured it out and we worked together. And I think those are some good ways. So.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's so volunteering is definitely a good one. I don't do it because my job is very social, being a university professor. I have built-in friends in some sense, but actually my friends are people I work with. They're like Cialdini and Newberg and Dave, who's down the hall from me in his office too. But I do think volunteering, if you're lonely and you're in a new place, is definitely a very good idea. But the other thing that the social psychology research on friendship indicates that one of the most powerful things that attracts me to other people is that they're similar in interests to me. And so you can always find, in a modern environment, one of the advantages we have is that we have the disadvantage of possible loneliness because we're isolated from our kin, but we can find, so Dave talks about rock climbing, you can find people with these specialized interests in the modern world, and finding people who are similar to you. We like people that are similar to us, okay? We like people who share our beliefs and our values, and you can find that. I mean, if you're religious, you can go find a church, okay? If you're political, you can go find a social action group. If you're into saving the environment, you can join the local Sierra Club. But you can figure out what it is that I most value, and there probably is a group of people that you can join that
shares that. I do want to say also the flip side of that is really important. Of usually if you're trying to meet somebody, say at work or whatever, figuring out the similarities. So for example, my dad has mentioned being very political. I think I'm far less politically left or right than my dad, and a lot of that actually comes from this group that I volunteered with was a mix of people on both sides of the political spectrum, but we both really cared about this issue that we were volunteering for. So I do think that even if you're around people who may seem different than you on one aspect or another, rather than highlighting those differences, look for and highlight the similarities, right? Look for the things you have in common. I think that's a good one. So, and then, go ahead.
I was just going to ask, so this kind of advice of seeking people who are similar to us would also certainly work for romantic partners, right? Because there's such a thing as assortative mating.
Yes. I mean, assortative mating works on lots of levels, that people are sorting out on, on things like, their habits, their physical attractiveness, their physical fitness, their political attitudes, but yes, it definitely is. It's easier to relate to mates who are, the more similar they are to you, the easier it is to form a relationship with them. Although what's also interesting is that over long term, it turns out that partners become more similar to one another. If you go 20 years later into a married couple, they're more similar than they were to begin.
One of the things we do mention in the book in terms of sort of finding and choosing a romantic partner is, I think there are these apps that will like match you. Like I know OkCupid for a while would match people, give them statistic matches based on political preferences and things like this. We actually recommend shopping locally, right? That one of the most key things is, do you share a friend group with these people? Yeah. Do you know people that they know? Because that provides a sort of support network and things that can really help with the relationship, especially if you've assessed what you want and decide you're looking for a long-term relationship, then I'd say that goes double.
And with that in mind, don't you also think that face-to-face interactions make things smoother? I mean, and in terms of attracting someone, it's easier that way than just, for example, texting or something, because there's lots of information missing there, like your tone of voice, your facial expressions, your posture, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. Proximity, like your physical proximity when you're talking to somebody, touch is a very powerful, and not just like kissing, but just, there's studies showing, the impact of just like touching somebody's hand, like not even in romantic things. That's actually the one I'm thinking of it's talking about people would get more tips if they would touch somebody, but
right.
those
waiters and waitresses.
Yeah. I mean, we're designed for mating with humans, like in real life, rather than with screens with humans on them, and so or text messages. And so I think that is really important. That's important for mate, like choosing and finding a mate. It's also really important for maintaining relationships. There's a lot of challenges come up from couples like arguing over text and things like that.
Yeah, so since you earlier mentioned, for example, this sort of cultural issue we have nowadays of people, uh, particularly when it comes to males, pushing the idea that it would be better for us to try to have sex with as many women or as many sexual partners as we can. Don't you think that that also stems, at least in part, from us living in societies with more people, and also connecting that to perhaps the paradox of choice, where it seems that there are many more people available nowadays than in traditional societies, and also, I mean, things like having immediate access to pornography on the internet. I mean, perhaps it tweaks our male brains into thinking that there are many more sexually available women nowadays than before.
So, Dad, why don't you take this? Is talking about we're talking about sort of how modern society, where there's so many people around, does that promote this desire for short-term mating? And you have studies on that going back to Playboy magazine, right?
Well, we did some research years ago suggesting that if you expose people to men to centerfolds from Playboy and Penthouse magazines, that they then rate their current partner as less attractive and less desirable. Although somebody actually was unable to replicate that recently. I don't know if it's because there's so much access now to that kind of stuff that people's adaptation level has shifted so far already. But yeah, that certainly seems to still make sense to me, that my ideas of what I could get or what could be possible in the ancestral environment, there were not many choices at all. You know, I would maybe bump into 10 people who I could have mated with in my lifetime, you know, and now you can go online and find 100 potential partners in 3 minutes, right? And just swipe through them all. And so that is, you mentioned the paradox of choice. That probably sets it up so that we're always thinking, oh, I could get something better. And that people are now marrying much later. And it could simply be because they're just thinking, well, wait. In fact, one of my colleagues, a female colleague who was single, she said she'll be on a date with some guy she met on OkCupid and thinking, well, this guy's okay, but maybe if I go home, there'll be a message waiting from a better guy. And so there is that danger, yes.
Yeah. I mean, I think a lot of factors sort of come together to lead to this, right? I think that people have different mating strategies, and we have the ability to adapt mating strategies to different environments. I think that their technology makes the sort of love them and leave them strategy easier, right, in the modern environment. And then I think there's this cultural norm that has sort of emerged out of that this is what everyone is doing. So I think all of these factors sort of come together in
Actually, there's an
ways.
Interesting study, which we don't talk about in the book, but my colleague in the Netherlands at the University of Groningen, Bram Boonk, did some research that suggested that if you tell people everybody's being promiscuous, there's a lot of people having a lot of affairs out there, it leads men to want to have more affairs, but women to want to have fewer affairs. So that's an interesting way in which this information can change depending upon, we can react differently to it depending upon our particular mating strategy.
So one last thing, I just on this idea is because Ricardo, you talked about this sort of idea of how the environment affects it, right? This is another thing where I think if people sort of assess their own preferred mating strategy, they may want to tailor their environment a bit. They may want to. This goes back to sort of if you're looking for a long-term thing, maybe Tinder is not the place you want to look for that, right? And if you're looking for a short-term thing, then maybe you should become, if you're a guy, maybe you want to become a musician or something, so you might want to consciously choose an environment that matches.
Mm-hmm. But don't you think that perhaps in modern post-industrial societies, another thing that is harder in the mating market for people is that so in traditional societies, marriages used to be arranged. So, I mean, people wouldn't really need to go out there and try to, develop their attraction skills or something like that to attract someone, because someone from their family would basically try to match them up with another person, a male or a female. And this is something, for example, that I talked about on the show with Menelaus Apostolou, because he wrote a book on that topic about mating in traditional versus modern industrialized societies. Don't you think that that would be an issue, a reason to explain why it's so hard for people nowadays, particularly young males, to find partners, because we haven't really evolved to develop those sorts of skills that are needed nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting that how mating is so important, and yet why is it that people feel so incredibly awkward in mating contexts, you know? And that's an interesting, and it could simply be because in the ancestral environment, we didn't need to be unawkward, because it would have been, there weren't a lot of choices, you know? No. And I think even before you had arranged marriages, you simply had arrangement by circumstance, that there just were only, you were the only teenage male in this group, and then there were maybe 2 teenage females in the local groups who were your third and fourth cousins, and your parents would talk to one another and say, okay, we'll match these 2 up. So you didn't need to be cool, you know, you didn't need to think about how I look, and, you know, and so in the modern environment, it is certainly, I remember I grew up in New York City, right? And you would think, wow, you know, what an ideal environment, you know, and there were lots of beautiful, I lived in a neighborhood with Italian girls, right? And they were so beautiful, you know, and the Irish girls, they were beautiful too. And yet I felt so incredibly awkward, okay, at that whole game. And I would have perhaps preferred it if my parents had stepped in and saved me the awkwardness.
So I think there might be 2 things that are sort of going hand in hand to make mating difficult for people these days. So one is, I think, in a sort of big global environment, if a guy wants to pursue a sort of short-term strategy where he's like, all I'm going to offer are my genes, he's got a lot of competition to prove that he's the best, got the best genes, right? Then there's also a strategy of, well, you want to commit, right? People still, I think, women still, I think there's studies showing they prefer commitment, right? And but proving that a guy is committed is tougher, because there's also, it's a lot easier for guys to sort of act. It's not, actually, I don't know if it's easier. I was going to say, I think it's tougher for women, especially on an app or something, to get a sense of, is this guy actually committed, or is he just saying he's committed? Because, you know, there's studies like the Josh Ackerman study, that guys who are not looking for a long-term relationship will say, I love you really quickly. And so I think that's the big challenge.
Women don't trust it.
Right. So
why don't you describe that study a little bit, Dave?
Oh, well, the study is that it was when people, whether men or women, are more likely to say, I love you first, right? Because there's the idea that, well, the stereotype, I think, is women are more romantic, and so they're probably going to say it first. It turns out, I believe, guys say it first. Guys, I can't remember, is it guys who were pursuing a short-term relationship said it even before guys who were not, or was it just that people preferred to hear it at different times?
They looked at well, first of all, they did find that women say, I love you after men say it. Men say it much more quickly, and I'm not sure I know that they asked the question of, if you heard someone say, I love you, and it was before you had sex, as compared to after you had sex. Guys who were into short-term relationships, they preferred hearing "I love you" before they had sex with the woman, because they thought that was a signal that they're about to have sex with this woman. Whereas women preferred hearing "I love you" after they had had sex with the guy, meaning that it's a sign that the guy is committed. Because if he says "I love you" beforehand, who knows? He could just be being a con artist. But if he says it after, then that means, okay, he's basically he has achieved that short-term goal, and yet he still says he's committed to me. And so women like hearing it afterwards. That was what Josh's finding was. But there is so what you were referring to, there's this danger. Apparently there are some guys who are very good at conning women in the modern world. And I think this guy was in Europe. There was some guy who was sort of famously going around, getting into short-term relationships with women and getting into their bank accounts and then disappearing. Yeah. And in the book, we talk about a guy named Giovanni Vigliotto, which might not have even been his real name, but this is a guy we opened the chapter on mate seeking by describing a woman who was a 40-year-old woman who was managing a flea market, and this guy comes in driving a big Cadillac, a big long white Cadillac, wearing a lot of jewelry and looking like he's got a lot of money, and he starts romancing her, and she ends up falling for him and marrying him. And then the next thing she knows, he's disappeared. He got her to sell her house, and he disappeared with her money and all of her belongings. And then she tracked him down and found out that he was married to not only one other woman, but 100 other women. 106, I think, was the number that they came up with. And he had done the same thing to all of these women. And that was something that our ancestors couldn't have gotten away with. Okay, they would have been, they weren't that mobile. So the automobile allowed Giovanni Vigliotto. And now the online world allows that even more easily, okay? Because you can not only be connected with, you don't have to get in your car and even drive to find the new mates. You can just do it online. And so, again, the shop locally advice would be especially for women to say, get a guy, local guys, you know who they are, your family knows who they are, your friends know who they are, and you're not going to be conned.
Because
anybody looking for long-term. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, because it's probably also easier to hold them accountable, right, in that sort of situation.
Yes, right.
Yeah, and I mean, in this case, probably, that case you described, we're probably talking about someone who scores high on the dark triad traits, right?
In terms of
like Machiavellianism and
psychopathy and narcissism. Yeah.
And psychopathy, yes, right. Yes, he undoubtedly was. He had those things all going. He was Machiavellian, he was narcissistic, and he was a psychopath, yeah.
But isn't it curious that there are studies suggesting that men who score higher on those traits are also more attractive to women? Because on the other hand, those are also the more manipulative guys and probably the ones who are less likely to commit in relationships, right?
Yeah, there's a kind of a scary finding by Christina Durante, I think, in which what she found is that when women are ovulating, they think these caddish guys are more likely to be good fathers. So it's like, of course, it's not true. And when they're not ovulating, they realize, no, the caddish guy, this slick, cool guy who seems extremely self-confident is probably not going to be a good father. But when they're ovulating, they think, so women lie to themselves as well. And so that's an interesting thing. I think probably what Gangestad and his colleagues who study these kind of different mating strategies would say is that when women are doing that, they're basically saying, at least their mechanisms are saying, go for the good genes. If these are genes, if this guy's attractive enough to sweet talk me, my sons will be able to sweet talk women in the future.
Yeah. I mean, I think there could be a lot of, it's sort of called the dark triad, and that gives it a sort of moral sense, you know, but I
Yeah.
think that there are probably advantages, right? And there may be advantages to having offspring with some of those traits, not only reproductive advantages, but possibly survival advantages and status advantages and things like that. And so, yeah, so I mean,
Yeah.
and then from a woman's point of view, it's like if a guy's not going to stick around either way, maybe it does wait, you know, maybe you're better off going for the guy with the best genes rather than the guy who just
pick the most charming guy, the most attractive guy, if he's not going to hang around. Although now the one interesting thing that came up, you know, we just read a review by one of my colleagues who read this book and is publishing a review of the book. And one of the things that he talks about is that in some sense, we do seem to take a moral perspective on some things. We're saying Osceola McCarthy is better than Genghis Khan. And he detected, and I think Dave and I differ on this a little bit, but he detected a sense in which we thought monogamy was better than, you know, polyamory, or
right.
he didn't use the term polyamory, but you did. And then Dave just mentioned, well, we have a moral reaction to things like what we call the dark triad, you know. And I think here the morality comes in. We have moral judgments because, you know, we're also looking to avoid being exploited. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why people don't like a psychopath and a narcissist, you know, and a Machiavellian, they're doing things that are good for them, but they're not good for other members of the group. Okay. It doesn't help when guys, you know, take from others and then disappear and don't reciprocate the benefits that they claimed they were going to. It's bad for trust within the group. And so we have moral, you know, these moral things are not just things that were created by the Catholic Church or whatever, a local society, okay? The moral judgments kind of come naturally because we have, you know, we prefer when the people in our groups act in certain ways. We prefer cooperative people. We prefer people who make commitments and stick with those commitments. Okay, so the morality isn't just a culturally relative thing. You know, some of it is, but some of it is not.
Sure. By the way, since you brought up that debate surrounding monogamy, polygamy, polyamory maybe, do you have any take on that, if we have evolved as a monogamous, a polygamous, or even a polyamorous species?
I mean, I think we've evolved as an adaptive species, right? That's one of the main sort of things that humans have going for them is we switch not just our mating strategies, but all sorts of strategies, both consciously and unconsciously, right? There's the studies on sort of, we talked about the guys where the testosterone affects their brains and, you know, how women can have different preferences depending on their ovulatory cycle. And so I think that I would say that most humans alive today, I don't know, I don't want to necessarily say, oh, they have the mechanisms for both, or even how much of it is a mechanism and how much of it is a mean. But I believe that we generally are kind of both depending on the situation. But that's not to say that if you've committed to a monogamous relationship, you should suddenly then say, oh, no, you know what? Now I'm not monogamous, right?
Although people do it. But so I wholeheartedly agree with you, Dave, that I think that it's, you know, we have if-then, what we have in our brain are if-then statements, okay? Under these circumstances, I'll do that, okay? If I happen to be the most attractive guy around and there's a surplus of women in the population, then I'll adopt a more polyamorous strategy. It'll be very desirable because then I can have lots of offspring, okay? If I happen to be a less attractive guy in a population where there's more men than women, then I'd better try a different strategy. Okay, and it isn't that we're thinking this consciously. It's just that we are designed to have, you know, if-then statements. Okay, that under these circumstances, this will be a good thing to do, and under those circumstances, that will be a good thing to do. Now, dynamically speaking, other people also have if-then statements going on, and they may have different preferences. You know, they may have, you know, females in general may prefer that males don't adopt, polyamorous strategies, because it's not in the interest of females to have their males distributing the resources widely to multiple offspring. And so there's going to be even a conflict between your if-then statements and other people around you's if-then statements. And so there'll be an emergent norm, and it will always be a little unstable.
Yeah.
I was going to say also the group itself will often have these norms, right, that will help the group. And I think sometimes people will say, oh, well, that's just a social norm, right? And whereas the thing I feel inside my own head, that's a true evolved desire, and so that should take priority. And I don't know that that's always the case either. Sometimes the group norms, so a group might say, hey, if somebody commits to a monogamous relationship and then breaks from that, we as a group may trust that person less. And
we may even punish them. We may punish them because, in some sense, again, societies, remember I talked before about Donald Campbell, we create social rules in order to control, to lower the extent to which selfish variance exercises itself in our groups. We're trying to prevent people. If you marry my daughter, okay, I don't give a shit if you happen to find some new opportunities now and think, oh, gee, it'd be better for me to be polyamorous, okay? I want you to stay monogamous.
Yeah. I mean, these are very complicated questions, right? Because it's very hard to just be descriptive and not add some moral twist to things. Because, for example, as we know from anthropology, 85 or 86% of all studied societies had some form of polygamy, but even in those societies it was basically the elite men who monopolized most women and were able to have second, third and fourth wives and so on, and the vast majority of men either had one wife or zero wives, and that also leads to social turmoil,
right? Precisely. So there's this, yes.
And probably less social turmoil in a small group where the men are more likely to be related, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so, and even then, this goes back to the sort of trade-off. The society has agreed, right? There is something to be said for, like, if a doctor who saves my life decides, okay, he's going to marry a second person, I might, as part of a group, be like, okay, we'll go with that, right? That he's provided benefits to the group to warrant that. But then other times, there may be times where a group or individual members of the group might be like, hey, man, no, you don't get multiple wives. So I think it's complicated at the group level.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of funny and interesting in one level. If you look at when males achieve success. So there's this whole thing of like the Me Too movement and so forth. And there's a conflict between, let's face it, it's the males who get success. When females get economic success, they don't seek multiple mates that I know of, but when men do achieve high levels of success and status, they have the opportunity for multiple mates, and they find it very hard to resist that. And so, in some sense, what the Me Too movement is that basically it's women in society saying, we don't want you. Yes, you have an opportunity. We are going to punish you. We're doing what Donald Campbell said. We're adding a counter punishment to make it so that you don't do that selfish thing. And that's interesting because it's different people's mating strategies competing with one another. At a societal level. A very interesting example of emergent processes coming out of individual mechanisms.
Yeah, I also, even with the Me Too movement, the stories are generally from women, but I often, I shared in, when you hear some of the most egregious sort of stories, I think guys, that resonates, of like, hey, what the heck is this guy up to, right? And so I do think that it's the whole group. So.
Mm-hmm. And talking about acquiring status, which is probably even more dramatic for males than females, do you think that economic inequality is a big issue in modern industrialized societies?
Yes.
I mean, we know it is. Actually, there's data on it. You've seen those graphs that show the percentage of, this is for the United States, but I'm sure it holds true in Europe as well, that there's a teeny percentage of the population that has a gigantic chunk of the economic resources, and then most of the people have, you know, very small amounts of the total economic pie, and what that actually has some problems, you know, beyond your political beliefs, although maybe this reveals some of mine. But Martin Daly, you know, well-known evolutionary psychologist, has some great data that suggests that the more economic inequality, the more violence. And one of my colleagues, I think, in Spain, has collected some data that suggests that, in fact, this is found even within Spain, in regions of Spain. I'm forgetting exactly how his data worked out, but it's just that there is a relationship between economic inequality and levels of violence. And so there's a cost to society of having too much economic inequality. And yet, as an individual, you don't ever turn the money down, okay? I don't, you know, I'm 74 years old. I have enough money to survive, okay? And if they force me to retire, you know, I'd survive. And yet, I'm not going to stop taking what I can, okay? Because it's, you know, it's just, look, we're designed to take what we can. And so sometimes, yeah, economic inequality it's a naturally emergent sort of process out of individuals competing, but it does have societal consequences.
Right. And one thing we've talked about in the book is sort of this idea of that status, right, within a tribe would have been from the most high status member of the group to the lowest status. That's so much closer. There's so much less distance in terms of the resources they would have access to, and just the sort of status within the group compared to what we have these days, right? There would never have been a time where one ancestor would have 1 billion squirrels and everyone else would only have one squirrel, you know, like, and so like, I think that this is a huge modern problem, right? This is like, and it affects, I mean, it affects every one of the 7 motives, I think, and in a major, major way.
Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
I just want to return to, in the chapter, we talk about economic inequality just to sort of describe the fact that there are lots and lots of levels in the modern world, which there weren't, and that's an interesting issue in the modern world. The other thing, that there are lots and lots of ladders in the modern world, that everybody did the same thing. Everybody hunted and collected berries in the ancestral environment. Now, some people make shoes, you know, some people make running shoes, and other people make dress shoes. Some people make pants. Some people provide food. Some people catch fish, okay? Some people give haircuts, okay? Some people teach courses at universities, you know, some people write books. There's lots of different things that people do in the modern world. So there's lots of, as an individual, because again, we're writing this book from the perspective of what can our kids or what can our friends do in terms of satisfying these motives. And so one of the things you can do in the modern world is you can choose the ladder that matches, you know, your skills and your personality, okay? I mean, I happen to be very lucky. I'm not a very competent person, okay? You know, Dave likes to work on things and fix things, and he's got a good engineering kind of mind. I'm terrible at it. Thank God there's a position called a university professor in which you can be pretty useless at most of the basic functions of life, but stand in front of a group and talk and do research and make a living at it, okay? You know, and so I was lucky to find the right ladder in some sense. And I think that one of the things you can do when you're young is you can say, or when you're a parent and you're advising your kids, look at all of the different possible occupations and ask 2 questions. One is, which ones are needed now in society? Because some of them we're very good at. Some people are very good musicians or good baseball players. But that's a very risky choice in which most people fail, it turns out. Most people don't make a living, unless they're incredibly good. They're not going to make a living as a musician or a professional athlete. Some people do. But, for most people, they should quickly say, okay, what's a place where there are jobs and that are jobs that fit with my personality? And then the second thing we talk about in that book is that whatever job you happen to choose, show up and work hard at it and help the other people in your organization. Be a good collaborator with the colleagues in your area. And if you happen to, don't complain about, what's wrong about the job. Instead, go in and have a positive attitude. And then the third thing we recommend is that if you want to move up in the hierarchy, there's a tendency, again, from an evolutionary perspective, people often talk about chimpanzee politics, that it's all what it is. It's a bloody game out there. Newt Gingrich was the Republican head of the House of Representatives, and he used to give this book. He used to give Duvall's book on chimpanzee politics to incoming representatives and say, this is what it's like. It's a bloodthirsty competition for status. It's like chimpanzees attacking one another, and that's what you've got to do. Never give up any power. And what we would argue, well, first of all, everybody hates Newt Gingrich, okay? And he had some success.
Probably not everybody. But
yeah, well, yeah, not everybody. Some people like him, okay? And so it's a costly strategy because Richard Wrangham wrote a book that suggests that individuals who strove for too much dominance in ancestral groups were likely to be killed, okay, if they took too much and didn't return something to the group. So, Joe Henrich has this distinction between prestige and dominance. What humans have as a way to achieve status as a human, you don't just have to be a bloodthirsty, aggressive individual, which can sometimes work, okay? But you also have the opportunity to achieve status via prestige, by providing benefits and knowledge to the group, and then having other people want to elevate you because they trust you and they want your judgment. And we recommend that, again, this is a moral judgment on my part, but I prefer working for people who care about the group and who bring knowledge and skills rather than people who simply want to get ahead for the sake of, being a bloodthirsty get ahead. In fact, most people who work for in organizations, they prefer prestige-based leaders rather than dominance-based leaders. And so we would recommend...
There's research on that. That's not just your personal
opinion. Not just my preference. There is, there is actually evidence. In fact, one of my graduate students, Adi Wiesel, has collected a lot of data suggesting that people often think of dominant males when they think of leaders. But then you ask, would you like to work for this person? No, actually, they'd prefer to work for a prestigious female way over a dominant male.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I guess that one of the reasons why I introduced the topic of acquiring status and the issue of economic inequality while we were talking about mating, and you introduced the work done by Martin Daly, which is great. I mean, is that when people are exposed to a context of economic inequality, perceived economic inequality, people who are low SES, low socioeconomic status, I mean, from the perspective of life history theory, it makes sense for them to develop a faster paced life history strategy. And so in the case of males becoming more violent, again, risky behavior to try to acquire mates as fast as possible because they don't expect to live that long, and so they want to try to impregnate females as fast as possible and as many as possible, and in the case of females, trying to have as many babies as they can as fast as possible, because they also don't think that it makes sense for someone who doesn't have big life expectancy to, I don't know, educate themselves and to try to acquire a good job or enter a good career. I mean, it makes much more sense to develop that fast-paced life history strategy, right?
Right. And that's got some dangers from a societal perspective. lots of individuals playing a fast strategy has costs. Okay. In fact, there's the Swedish guy who does that cool stuff on data with the bubbles moving out. I'm forgetting his name.
Hans Rosling, perhaps.
Rosling, yes, good. Hans
Yeah.
Rosling, yeah. And one of the things he argues is that, well, making poor people wealthier, redistributing at least enough so that people in poverty-stricken environments are feeling less concern over their babies dying, could actually help the population problem. Okay, because when people get to a middle class level, they don't need to be extremely wealthy. Okay, but once people feel like I'm comfortable, okay, my children are going to survive, they stop pumping out so many babies. Okay, and so even for the sake of the world, as this is an evolved motive, but we do have an evolved desire to live in a pretty place and in a not overly crowded place. But for the sake of society, some economic redistribution is a very good thing, because the fewer desperate people there are, the fewer desperate people are going to be in the next generation, because the really desperate people won't have 6 kids. They'll slow it down. Just that's
no. Aren't so? I'm just thinking about this because I'm like, well, right, we have a lot of economic inequality, and that should lead to faster life history strategies. But I think globally, like, sort of everybody is moving towards a slower life history strategy, right? Isn't there the studies of like people who are in cities, certainly?
Yeah, and this is partially because of less childhood mortality. This is what Rosling argues, that as childhood mortality has gone down, as we've distributed medications and and so forth, and but there are still, Rosling also points out, there are still a lot of kids dying in undeveloped areas, and so his argument would simply be, it's that floor that we need to bring up, and it'll get even better. But yes, it has been getting better, and it's been getting better partially because the floor has gone up, and because there's been the distribution of medical care. But there's still some people that are below that threshold.
Yeah, I also, I mean, the other thing that goes hand in hand with that sort of economic inequality, right? It's economic inequality and a lack of a feeling of options for sort of economic mobility. And
Right.
So I think what we actually end up seeing a lot these days is people having a fewer number of kids and investing in more in those kids, right? Rather than having 6 kids. And I think that's coming partly from the fact that there's not a lot of survival threats, but it pays to have status, and one way to achieve that is to just have a few kids and really invest in them.
And what's interesting, Dave, I don't know if you know, Oliver Sings, I know you know Oliver.
Yeah,
Oliver
that's what I
Singh
was
is
talking about.
a graduate of our program who now is at UC Irvine, and he's done this research on density and mating strategies, okay? And what you would think is, if you're really poor, or living in a dense environment, that you would rationally say, hey, I'll have fewer kids. But it turns out that when you live in denser areas, you do begin to have fewer kids. But poor people don't always do that. Okay, poor people sometimes, who are feeling desperate, end up having larger families. And you would think, well, that's sort of irrational. But again, it's one of these cases in which our rational mind isn't what controls our behavior. It's our ancestral, under ancestral circumstances, if there's a lot of desperation around, you want to have more kids so that some of those kids will survive. And I think.
Yeah, go ahead. Oh, I was going to say, I actually think what we're seeing in real life these days is a lot of people who are taking a slow life history strategy, but then feeling bad about it, right? You look at Instagram and you see images of, both beautiful people and immense economic, right? The people I see on Instagram with their boats and their jets, they have a much more lavish lifestyle than I do, right? I think I know for myself, I have my 2 kids and I take care of my 2 kids, and that I should be perfectly content with that. And then I look on Instagram and I'm like, oh my gosh, we've got to figure out how to become billionaires, right? And so, and I think that happens to a lot of people, right? And I think that's what we're seeing, is that actually people are not pursuing faster life history strategies statistically, but a lot of people seem to be feeling bad about the fact that they're not.
So Dave, the advice on that I would give as a father is get off Instagram.
I mean, I think, I think that is pretty good advice, right?
Yeah, but that's exactly a point that I was going to make here, because even if you are middle class and making, I don't know, $55,000 a year or something like that, I mean, when you look at Instagram and particularly the millionaires and the billionaires, I mean, the stakes are really high. It makes lots of difference if you are making $55,000 a year or $1 million or $1 billion even. It makes lots of difference.
And also, I mean, and that's just in terms of, I feel like, okay, this idea of, pursue a slow life history strategy and enjoy it and get off Instagram is good advice for for people in my situation in terms of relationships and kin care. There is also that other factor nowadays of people who they're making $55,000. Here in Arizona, the housing market is insane, right? So somebody who's making $55,000 can't afford to pay rent. So I think that's a situation where you can't just go off Instagram and say, don't worry about it, right? I'm not entirely sure what the actual solution is. I mean, that's a thing that's almost it's been coming a long way, but it's hit really fast just in the past few years. So
let me just go back to mating. One of the pieces of advice you gave when it comes to acquiring a mate is to shop locally. So, but what about retaining a mate? Because I mean, nowadays we also have very high rates of divorce. So just to give an example, recently in Portugal, we had new data coming out and it's like 73%, if I'm not mistaken, 72% of marriages that end in divorce. So
really,
I mean,
wow.
Yeah. It's really high. I think it's the highest rate in all of Europe. So what to do about it?
So can I ask you just one more question about the Portugal? Was there any explanation of why Portugal? That's high.
Well, I mean, unfortunately, I didn't get into reading the report itself.
Okay.
I only read the news, and it didn't, and I don't think they mentioned any explanation.
So I don't know that. So for mate retention, for whatever sort of relationship people are in, and I think, the most common one is still sort of monogamous relationships, but I think that a lot of the best advice isn't necessarily from evolutionary psych specifically, as much as it's from things like the Gottman Institute that have just studied relationships. And these are things like being attentive to your partner, being affectionate to your partner, being complimentary, not holding grudges. Those are some of the best things people can do. I'm trying to think of specifically good. And then the one other thing I would say, just in terms of evolutionary mismatch, I think there's this idea these days where if you get divorced, right? So relationships, bonding, parenting, those are sort of things that we've been doing for for millennia, right? Marriage is a little more cultural, right? And I think there's this idea that when you get divorced, that means you cut all ties, the relationship is over, and you've suddenly gone from this sort of cooperative environment to now it can be, often divorces can be very adversarial, or they can be one parent will just disappear, right? And I think that those things, that is a situation where it's good to sort of still good, but still, in my opinion, it's good to still try to match the ancestral environment in the sense that still stick around, right? Like still work together, right? And that I think is what you would find often is, if you've mated with somebody, regardless of what your official status is on paper, you guys are still sort of in it together, I guess.
You still share the parenting. So
yeah.
Can I just add to that
Yeah.
in one sense that in the book we talk about a few bits of advice, and I want to underline one of the things Dave said. An evolutionary perspective helps us understand why we are how we are now. It doesn't necessarily always provide the answers to how you solve that. In some sense, we need, more modern technology to figure. And, so Dave referred to this research which looks at happy couples and unhappy couples, the Gottman Institute stuff. And some of the suggestions are, just something as simple as hugging your partner frequently. It turns out that if you're in a relationship, physical contact actually does do biological things to make the partners feel bonded. So hugging frequently, just doing it automatically. Be sure to hug when you get up in the morning, hug when you're leaving for work. Those things actually facilitate the bonding. The other thing is, there's a lot of research in social psych that suggests that we have a tendency to bias our attributions about who does more. When you ask people, what percentage of the housework do you do? It turns out that when you add up what the man and the woman say, it comes to over 100%, right? Which is why houses are always so clean, right? Well, no, it's because the man sees what he does and the woman sees what she does and doesn't see what the other one does. And so there's a tendency to exaggerate our own inputs. And so it's very important. There's a rule that Linus Pauling had, which was about do unto others 25% better than you would have them, because to correct for subjective error. I think in relationships, you need to do 50%, like give yourself 50% less credit and give your partner 50% more credit. Very useful advice. Partners who thank one another, who help one another, they get along much better. And don't argue, it's really hard. We have an automatic response to defend ourselves. If you say, gee, I'll automatically respond myself. And it sometimes pays to check just to do the thing. Count to 10 before you respond with a bickering little comment. Oh, well, you didn't do this yesterday. You said I didn't do the dishes, but you did.
Let me. I just want to add to this because I think one thing that you're mentioning is, so in-person arguments are, we've had for forever, right? But one of the modern challenges is there's a lot of ways that there is. We've talked about this sort of idea of arguing over text can be really bad. There's this sort of way that digital jealousy plays out. I don't think we're designed to necessarily. I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you see like a picture of your current partner with their ex, right? That may be an old picture, but that can evoke this sort of like feeling of, hey, what the heck? And so, and there's also, like, I was interviewing for a different thing, Tao Ha studies adolescent relationships, and she talks about how adolescents get into a lot of fights on, about like, why did you like her picture on Instagram, right? Like a guy who's in a relationship with one person will either like some, like, bikini model or one of that girl's friends, and so these sorts of digital challenges are a really interesting modern challenge, and I think that is another time where I think it may benefit people to sort of try to, when you have serious conversations, pick a time and place and have them in person, and also be really careful about your digital presence and how that affects your partner.
So digital infidelity is another, not only digital infidelity, but the digital opportunity for real infidelity. These websites where you actually say, life is short, have an affair. Ashley Madison. So the modern world provides, again, relationships are hard. One of the things you have to realize when you're in a relationship is, look, it's always like, I have to consciously tell myself to give my partner 50% more credit, but I can't always do that. And if I go online and see, oh, I can have lots of other mates, or I can have an affair, that's probably going to undermine your commitment. If you want to stay in a monogamous relationship, or whatever, even a polyamorous relationship, but you want to stay in it, you ought to be very careful about your partner's, being sure that you don't trigger unnecessary jealousy in your partner. And I'm sure even polyamorous couples have to deal with this. They have to basically be very careful about the way they have their, their extra pair matings. And again, a simple rule: try to put your partner first.
I just want to add one last thing to that, Ricardo. Sorry, but I know, which is that also there is theory from attachment theory and things. Having shared goals it really helps a long-term relationship. So one thing is, think about these fundamental motives and how are you helping? I think a lot of times people think, oh, my romantic partner is just there for mating, but thinking about ways to help them achieve all their other goals can be good.
No, that's a very good. I want to underline that, Dave. Let's go through it again. Your partner, helping them keep their friendships, and not interfering with their friendships. Okay, helping them do well in their, acquisition of status and career goals. Is rather than just thinking about yourself. And even helping them with, take care of the kids. That basically. Do a little extra there too, and I think that's just a very
and with the kids,
piece of advice.
A lot of times, with divorced people will have kids from previous marriages, and so I think that can be one where really you have to make a real concerted effort to make sure those kids are also included. So okay.
So the last big fundamental problem we have to deal with. What about taking care of our family members? Is it also harder in modern industrialized societies, or not?
Yeah, well, for one thing, we move around a lot more, right? That makes it a lot tougher. And so, and then we also have these things like, apps. They distract kids. Parents often talk about, oh, my kid never turns their phone off. Parents sometimes have the same challenge, right? And so, so I think all those things do make it. And then the other thing is, as we were just mentioning, there's sort of, blended families and things like that, which that's probably not unique to the modern environment, but. That is still a modern challenge. So.
But when it comes specifically to families, because people who fall more on the conservative side of the spectrum mention the importance of the nuclear family so much, do you think that because we, evolutionarily speaking, have been doing a lot of cooperative breeding, that the nuclear family is really that important?
But ancestrally, it wasn't nuclear families; it was extended families. And in fact, even in the modern world, I think we try to, So I'm very happy that Dave moved 3 blocks away from me, and that I have both him and his son and his daughter to help me raise my other son. Okay, and they're friends to us, and Dave's Dave's mom, who was divorced from me, she moved out to Arizona when he had a child. And he's divorced now, but his mother-in-law moved to Arizona also to help raise the children. And so in some sense, we kind of have a natural tendency to recreate those ancestral groups when we have kids. And that's something that I think we should be very careful about, not, if our relatives are around us, treat them nicely, okay? Hang on to them, because they care more about your kids than the people who run the preschool and are just, getting them, the tuition money. They have a genetic interest in your kids. And so I think it's really important to consciously say, don't step on the toes of your relatives, even though, they do have your interest in their genes. Thank them every time they do something nice for you. I should thank Dave every time he helps out his younger brother, okay? And I should even thank my ex-wife, who is, I'm not together with, but she helped raise Dave, and she really helps him take care of his grandkids. And consciously having a little checklist to say, be sure human beings like to be thanked. They like gratitude. And so treasure your relatives, and especially treasure your step relatives, because they don't have any genetic interest, but thank them twice as much, 4 times as much.
Yeah. So just one last question, and I've asked you earlier about what would it mean for a human to live a fulfilling life. Toward the end of the book, you mentioned being kind to others. Why is that such an important piece of advice?
I'm going to start, because I know I was sort of so one of the things is, you don't always want to be kind to everybody to the point where you've given away your everything you have and you starve to death, right? But I think sometimes, one of the reasons we always say be kind to other people, why there's so many social things pushing us to be kind, one is it helps the people around us that we care about. It also is a way of putting a long-term goal ahead of a short-term goal. And, if you help other people, they're likely to help you. And I think that I would say, thinking consciously about, all right, what are my goals and what are the goals of the people around us in terms of their motives, and thinking about how to help everyone achieve those should have long-term benefits that pay off more than the short-term costs.
Yeah, it's actually not that you want to be constantly thinking this, but it's in your self-interest to be unselfish. Okay, my favorite finding is a finding from Liz Dunn, who's here up at UBC, and she did a study where she went out and she asked people, what would you rather do? Be given $20 to spend on yourself, or spend $20 on someone else? And people said, well, I'd rather, felt like economists, it'd feel better to get the $20 from myself. But she went out and she did this, and she gave people $20 on the campus at UBC. And then she asked them to either spend it on themselves and then report tomorrow, or spend it on someone else. And the people who spent the money on someone else, they were happier the next day. Spending the money on yourself didn't make you happier. Spending money, so it's actually, it has other data that suggests is people, when they get raises, the people who get a raise and spend more of their raise on gifts are actually happier several months down the line, okay? And so it looks like there's actually a causal relationship between doing nice things for others. We're wired up to actually, I pat myself on the back if I do something nice for you, because I think, at some non-conscious level. And so, what we would suggest is just let that out. Don't be thinking, don't be counting, what did I get from this person? Just ask, what can I give to this person? Not because you want to be exploited and you want to give all your stuff away, but because in the long run, it's actually better for you. People who have strong relationships feel better. They feel more fulfilled. They feel more well-being.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Dave, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, so I did want to say, so the thing I would add to that, right? Because we have this chapter on sort of getting. It's not called Getting the Bad Guy. When we were making it about movies, it was called Getting the Bad Guy, right? But it's our self-protection chapter, and I think the flip side of be kind to other people, I would also say when you're angry and you feel like you want to fight in the modern environment, think about not necessarily fighting against other people, but think about ways we can fight these systems that don't help anybody. Because a lot of the biggest modern problems we have are not other people deliberately trying to hurt us in any way. We just have these systems that have developed and gotten so complex, but there's ways we can make them better. So if you're looking for a fight the machine, I guess.
Yeah. But by the way, just one last thing. Where do you think that feeling good of being kind to others come from, evolutionarily speaking? Is it that we're really adapted to that, or is it a byproduct of something else?
I would say we are evolved. We lived in groups. Okay, our ancestors. I don't know if you who's the guy that did the skateboard study? Bill von Hippel. I don't know if you ever interviewed Bill von Hippel, but he has this
yes.
book.
Yeah.
So and he makes a strong argument that basically, one naked ape running around on the plains of North Africa would not have done very well. But you get 10 of them throwing rocks, and they're incredibly successful. And so our groups made our ancestors successful. And the better you get along with those other 10 naked apes, okay, the better your own survival. So I believe we are designed to want the other people around us to be happy and to think that we did good for them, because then they'll reciprocate. So I actually think we're wired up to be nice. I mean, a lot of people made this mistake when they saw Dawkins' book, The Selfish Gene, assumed that selfish genes create selfish organisms. They don't. It's in our selfish genes' interests to be unselfish. We are wired up to get along with other people. And the more you can, I actually think the modern meme of, like the Wall Street, do what's right for you, that's unnatural. That's an unnatural way to be. The natural way to be is do what's right for your group. And it turns out that secretly that is what's right for you.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess this is a good point to end on. The book is, again, Solving Modern Problems with the Stone Age Brain, Human Evolution and the 7 Fundamental Motives. I will be leaving a link to it in the description box of the interview. And thank you both so much for coming on the show and for writing the book. It was a real pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you. It was great to talk to you.
Thanks for having us.
Enjoyed it. Thanks. We'll.
Hi guys, thank you for watching this interview until the end. To keep the channel sustainable, I would like to ask you to please visit my Patreon page and to consider making a pledge there. Any amount, even $1 per month, would already be a great help. Otherwise, and if you like what I'm doing, please share it, leave a like and hit the subscription button. This show is brought to you by Enlights Learning and Development Done Differently. Check their website at enlights.com. I would also like to give a huge thank you to my main patrons and PayPal supporters, Karen Litske and Blanchett Perga, Larsen, Lau Guerrero, Francis Ford, Hans Frederick Sunder, Ricardo Vladimiro, Greg Healy, Adam Castle, Olaf Alex, Jonathan Wissel, Jacob Klinkby, Matthew Whittingbird, Arno Wolfkin, Tim Hollis, Henrik Alenia, John Connors, Paulina Barron, Philip Force Connolly, Jerry Mueller, Herbert Gintis, Bo Weingard, Rebecca Neuberger Goldstein, Dan Demetrio, Robert Windiger, Rui Inácio, Arthur Coe, Zup, Marco Neves, Colin Holbrook, Susan Pinker, Bernardo Seixas, Pablo Santurbano, Simon Colombo, Jorge Spinha, Phil Kavanagh, Corey Clark, Mark Blythe, Roberto Inguanzo, Michael Stormir, Samuel Andreev, Tiago Nunes, Bernard Ugni, Alexander Dunbauer, Fergal Cusson, Evan Bodrenko, Al Herzog, Don Ross, Jonathan Librand, Oslan Bullitt, Nathan Nguyen, Stanton T, Samuel Correa, Eric Hines, Mark Smith, J.W., João Eira, Tom Hummel, David Sloan Wilson, Yacila Dez Araújo, Eden Solon, Romain Roach, Dmitry Grigoriev, Diego Londoño Correa, Tom Roth, Yannick Punter, Adana Rusmani, Charlotte Bliss, Nicole Barbaro, Adam Hunt, Pavel Ostaszewski, Nelek Bach, Catherine and Patrick Tobin, Al Ortiz, Guy Madison, Gary G. Hellman, João Linhares, Lida Cosmides, Saima Afzal, Adrian Yegi, Nick Golden, Paulo Tolentino, João Barbosa, Jules Price, Edward Hall, Edin Bronner, Franca Bortolotti, Gabriel Pons Cortez, Ursula Litske, Denise Cook, Scott, Zachary Fish, Tim Duffy, and Max Belby. My producers Isar Webb, Jim Frank, Lucas Staffiniak, Ian Gilligan, Luís Caetano, Tom Vanagdam, Curtis Dixon, João Linhares, Benedict Mueller, Vega Guidi, Sardas France, Thomas Trumbull, and Nuno Welder. And my executive producers Michel Rugieski, Rosie, James Pratt, Matthew Lavender, Sergio Quadriano, and Bogdan Kanivets. Thank you for all.